Today, I'm going to show you how to do this. Fade in, multiple animations, and an interaction animation as well. Oh, and hey, I'd like to mention this video's sponsor, Skillshare.com. Now, it's a brand new year here in 2019, and Skillshare will help keep you learning and thriving as they offer 25,000 different classes in coding, design, business, and more. For instance, you're about to watch my video with JavaScript, but you could watch this full JavaScript course at Skillshare. Skillshare is also super affordable with a subscription that only costs $10 a month, but if you're one of the first 500 of my subscribers to click the link below here in the description, you get the first 2 months free, so take advantage. Hey y'all, Gary Simon of Coursetro. So today we're going to take a look at Anime.js in order to create sequence animations with their timeline. Now I took a look at Anime.js before in this channel on a different video about SVG, but I really wanted to cover the timeline because it's a completely different thing. All right, so what I will initially do is show you how to do that animation pretty much the vanilla JavaScript way, and then I'll show you how much easier it becomes if you use something like Anime.js to do it for you. All right, so for today's question, which animation platform do you use? Could be GSAP, could be Anime.js, or something else. Let me know in the comments. Make sure to subscribe, and let's get started. All right, so to get started, I am here in Visual Studio Code as usual with an empty folder open up. And I'm going to create an index.html file, exclamation point, enter. We're going to hit link here to get our CSS in a folder called CSS main.css. It's like Groundhog Day over here. Create a new folder called CSS. We're going to put main.sass in it. You're going to need the Sass extension. So if we click on extensions and type in Sass, you'll see right here, live Sass compiler is the one you'll want to install. So we'll click watch Sass right there. Creates our main.css file so we can write our Sass. And then in index.html, you can right click and open with live server. You're going to need the live server extension. So those are the two that you will need just to follow along exactly as I'm doing at least. And so that'll open it up with live browser reloading and all that good stuff. All right, so just an empty page now, and let's get the HTML written out. Control B to get rid of the sidebar. I'm going to get rid of that as well. Okay, so initially I'm just going to have an H1 element, just design for grid, we'll call it. And for the actual the grid and the design, the elements that we're going to animate, you could approach this in several ways. You could do SVG graphic. I found that when I did the SVG graphic route for just these vertical or these columns, these strips essentially, it produced a lot of code. So I thought, and plus also dealing with the view box of SVG and trying to make it responsive and work well is a little bit tricky. So I decided to put inside of a section element just a bunch of divs. And you could do this dynamically through JavaScript. You can implement all these divs. I'm just going to make 10 of them. So what's that, 6? And there we go. All right, next we're going to put in our script. We're going to get in Anime.js just through a CDN. And I found this just by going to Google and type in Anime.js CDN. There's a bunch of them, but be careful which you do use. Because depending on the version, it may not have certain features that are showing up in the current documentation, such as stagger, as I found out. I was wondering why it was not working. All right, so, and then we're going to have just our inline JavaScript down here. All right, before we get to that part, though, let's go to our Sass and get this all styled up as needed. So here's our index HTML. And we'll write our Sass over here. Although there's hardly going to be any Sass anyways. It's not very complex. So we're just going to have a body element, of course, and we're going to set the margins to 0. We're going to have height 100 viewport height. That way we can scale those strips 100%. And then also we're going to put, not width, sorry, font family, of course, Montserrat. And also we're going to do overflow hidden as well. Just for this demo, otherwise there will be scroll bars when we rotate those bars. So then we're going to put section display grid, and grid template columns is just going to be repeat function 10 times auto. All right, And if you were to add in and make it dynamic and add in through the DOM the 10 different divs or whatever, divs, the amount of divs you will want, you would have to adjust this as well. So that's why I didn't do it. It would add extra work. Then also nested inside, we have our divs inside of it. And we're going to set the background color just for now, blue, just so we can see it initially, but we're going to set it to white. We're going to say the height is 100 viewport height. And that's good. That's good for now. There is one other property that we'll add in after. And then H1, we're going to have a font size is 5em, position absolute. Top is going to be like 40%. Left will be 12%. Opacity will be 0. And z-index will be 2. Now you could probably take the opposite approach and make this not a position absolute. You can make these position absolute. It's up to you, really, depending on the needs of your layout. All right. So now it just looks like a completely blue background because we don't have any width separating any of these elements, which we'll do through JavaScript itself. So I'm going to set this back to white. And one of the things that we're going to be changing initially are the colors. And I want those colors to transition. So we're going to add in a transition element, but not just yet. We will we'll adjust that just after, just so I can show you what the transition property will do. Okay, coming back here, let's go to the bottom and start writing out the JavaScript. Now I'm going to show you, before we get to the actual AnimeJS part, I wanted to show you, why you might want to use AnimeJS. Just to show you the vanilla JavaScript way of achieving some of these animations. So what we need to do first, if we're just going to approach this through pure JavaScript, is we need to get access to all these divs. All right. If you know anything about JavaScript DOM manipulation, I just woke up, by the way, then you know that we would use query selector all for that. And by the way, I've never actually done JavaScript DOM tutorial, so I'm going to be doing that one here very soon this month. So we're going to say grids. We'll say let grids equals document dot query selector all, and we're going to get just all the divs, or you could say section div, whatever. I'm just going to say div because I only have these one sets of divs in here anyhow. So then after that, we're going to say that num equals 0 first, and you'll see how this comes into play in a second. And we'll say const, nope, we're not going to do that just yet. So now we're going to say, we'll say grids for each, because grids is really just an array of these div elements, so we can loop through them. So we'll say for each grid, we'll pass in our grid, and then in here, we'll just do a set. Well, for now, we're not going to do the set timeout. I just want to do, we'll say grid. Now we have access to each individual grid item. I cannot talk today. Dot style background color equals light blue. All right, so we'll go ahead and save that. And as you can see, even though we have our background color set to white, which is the value over here, you'll see that it is set to light blue automatically. We don't see any animation because it happens instantaneously. So we could do something like a set timeout. So we could do set timeout, and this is where our num variable will come into play. And we'll open this up. Let me just close that out and end it there. All right, and then we'll just put in a delay where we say num plus equals 100 milliseconds. So it's going to add 100 to this value every time it goes through, and this will create sort of an animation for us. So if I refresh, there we go. Doesn't look that exciting, but we can add in a transition property over here, which will create an animation from this original color right here of white to the light blue. So that is very simple. Just type in transition and the property name. So background color. And then the duration of how long you want those to last. So we'll just say 1 second. So now we go back. There we go. Something pretty interesting. Now, what if we wanted to have like a multi-step animation? Like after these all come in, we'll separate them out a little bit, maybe making each individual div like 90% to create the div column sort of template or whatever that you commonly see in UI design. So what we'll do is, in order to do that, we can create chained set timeouts. If you tried to do it without chaining these properly, it would be kind of difficult because you'd have all these set timeouts and it really just starts to clutter your code. But we'll do it anyhow, and you could do it with promises when it comes to chaining your set timeouts, so that when you run a set timeout, you can say, okay, this next set timeout for this next set of animations should only run once this one is complete, for instance. So to do that, we can go ahead and create a delay function. Const delay equals, and we'll pass in just one property, time. And we create a new promise. And we'll say resolve, set timeout. We pass in the resolve, and we can also pass in time. All right. Seems a little bit confusing, but now what we could do is we can wrap this in a delay, and we can pass in a time parameter. So we say time, or no, sorry, delay, and we'll make this start right away. So 0, and then we say then. All right, and we're going to open that up, and after that we close this. All right, there we go. So then nothing's going to change now, but now what we can do is you can copy this, and we'll say this will start maybe 500 milliseconds after all these have completed. And now let's change something else here. So maybe we'll change the background color to a real light blue. In that case, we can use RGB 228 to 42, 255. That's just basically a real light blue color that I got from changing it over here. And then also we could change the width, grid.style.width. And by the way, I'm changing these CSS style properties. You could also attach classes and remove them and do all that stuff if you wanted to. So we'll just say 90% here. All right, so now we save this. Let's refresh. First it's going to do that animation, and then that's going to come in. So you've created sort of like a sequence animation of sorts. All right. So also, right now, you know our H1 element is not showing up because we have opacity 0 set to this. So what if we wanted to show our H1 element? Well, we could have another delay where we simply change the opacity from 0 to 1 right here. But it gets even more tricky because what if you wanted your H1 element to kind of show up maybe on an offset, maybe at 300 milliseconds or something, so that you could create kind of like an offset-based sequential animation. It would get your code would become more tricky, is what I'm trying to illustrate with all of this. So let's go ahead and remove all of this and then do it the Anime.js way. Now, of course, there's a takeaway. Of course, if you're going to do something that's strictly pure vanilla JavaScript with no other libraries, you're likely going to have less code, which will mean less file size and faster load times. But still, even minified, I think even the full version of Anime.js is like 40 KB, and the minified version is probably quite a bit less. So if you have a lot of animations taking place, and maybe you aren't the greatest at vanilla JavaScript, then you can definitely take that route. Don't feel discouraged or whatever. So let's go ahead now and do it the Anime.js way. So Anime.js, we come here. this is the GitHub page. They have their own site, and they have their own documentation with a lot of great examples. So if you go to the example or the documentation section, it has all of the docs right here that you want and would want to need, along with great examples and the code examples and everything. The one we're going to look at here is timeline specifically for all of these. So like I said, just refer to these, but I'm not going to refer to it probably anymore for this tutorial. So let's get rid of everything. So we're gutting it all out. And first we're going to create a timeline. All right. So again, that's in the timeline section of AnimeJS. So let TL equals anime.timeline. And you could pass in options here, like if you want to change the default easing. So we'll say ease out expo. And you could also set a duration, like 750 milliseconds. And then we reference our timeline and we use the add method. All right, so our goal is basically to recreate that same sequence, plus even make it better. So we're going to say targets. This is the one necessary method or property that you need to define. Targets is going to be section div, or you could just say div again, and that's going to get all of them. So you don't have to manually loop through with JavaScript using for each. This will do it for you automatically. We'll say width. For now, we're not going to set a width. We're going to say background color. Now, of course, when it comes to the CSS property way of defining, or the JavaScript way of defining CSS, you use camel case, not the regular way over here, like background hyphen color. And you can put in pretty much almost any CSS property here. And then you just start adjusting them as you want them. So our background color we'll say is RGB. Let's see here, 197, 197, 255. Real quickly, just in case you're confused, I didn't come up with those out of nowhere, obviously. When you hover over a color value here in Visual Studio Code, you can choose what you want and it tells you right up there. All right. Continuing on with that, we'll also say, because we want, well, let's just save this right now. This will change simply the background color, and it's going to do it instantaneously. So if you go back to our document, there you go. They're all coming in instantaneously. The documentation has a staggering section, and it shows you a code example of how you simply add this to your anime method there. This is all you have to add to create that stagger. You don't have to do a set timeout or anything like that. So we're just going to put in delay anime.stagger, and then for how long in between you want them to be. Ours was 100 when we started first. Make sure you put your comma here. Save it. So we refresh, and there we go. Works exactly as we want it to. All right, so now let's add in the next section where we change up the width of those. So let me just copy this real quickly. You're still going to need to specify your targets right here. And now let's put in, for this one, a width. And the width will be, I will say 90%. And the background color, we're going to change to be even lighter blue, which happens to be 235, 235, and 255. And then the stagger, we're not going to have that. We're just going to remove that here. Now notice how it kind of applies the width of 90% right away, which it shouldn't do. So the way you fix that is we just add in width right here, 100%. So now it should fade those all in like we saw initially, and then they just slowly grow from 100% to 90%. Of course, it's responsive and all that good stuff. Same thing here. Very cool. So now we can also have our H1 show up. So let's copy this here and paste it. Our targets is just going to be H1 element. You can put in classes and div IDs, of course, as well. And we'll put in top. We'll have it fade in and down, or fade up, I think. So we'll do 20%. We're going to change our opacity 1. All right, and we can also specify a duration. So we'll say 4 seconds, which is 4,000 milliseconds. So if we do this, we'll see this goes, and then it comes in at the end. What if you wanted it to occur while this other stuff was animating? What you can do is specify an offset. And again, this is all in the docs. You just put a comma here at the end, and you put in negative equals, we'll say 1600 milliseconds. So notice how quickly it came in this time. Let's refresh. And there you go. Very, very easy. So you can see the coding involved, compared to the vanilla JavaScript way is much, much less here when you're using AnimeJS. So now I just want to demonstrate further how you can do different things with this. For instance, you could make it so that if somebody clicks a button, you can further manipulate these items. So we could do, for instance, so we'll create another instance of anime, and this time we're going to assign it to a variable. And so we can say, let's say we'll call this something that's relevant. We'll just call it rotate me. All right, and then we'll say anime, and inside of here we're going to define our targets. Again, that's required, and we'll take the entire section, which is going to be everything, all the divs itself, and then we'll rotate it based on like some user interaction or something, or just create some sort of custom animation. We'll say scale Y is 2, and by the way, all the properties that you can animate they're in the documentation. Scale X, we'll say 2. You maybe just be able to do shorthand scale, and it will apply to both. Translate, sorry, misspelled that. Translate X, we'll say 40%. We'll say rotate will be 45 degrees. We'll do duration, we'll make it 5 seconds. And then autoplay, false, because we don't want this to run right when the page loads. We're just defining it, so it's not going to autoplay. It will only play if we run the play method. So we're going to just to make it simple, I don't want to create a button or anything. This would be silly to implement otherwise, but just for the purpose of this demo, we'll say document.querySelector. We'll get our H1, and we'll say addEventListener. And by the way, let's close this out. And the addEventListener is going to listen for a mouse over. So once it hovers over it, and we'll say, what was it called? Rotate me dot play. So you see there's a bunch of methods that we have access to. So let's refresh this. And all those methods you can find in the play control section of AnimeJS. So if we hover over it, look at that. And it's wobbling back and forth based on the easing type that's applied by default. And so there's also an entire section of your easings, like the linear, very typical. There's a lot of these other ones where it shows you all the potential values. So there's a lot of really cool things, tons of flexibility. Let's check it out again. And there you go. Very cool stuff. You could even make it another function. Maybe you could try this yourself for an addEventListener of mouse out, and so that when you hover off of it, it will play the reverse. There's also a reverse method in the documentation that you can find in AnimeJS that will make this come back once you mouse out. So there's so many different things you can do, obviously. And so hopefully I've demonstrated and you have a decent grip of the timeline and AnimeJS animation in general. All right, everyone, hopefully you enjoyed that. Make sure to subscribe if you did. Make sure to answer today's question, which is which animation platform do you use? I'll see you soon. Goodbye.